Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Ag Uncensored with your host, me, Nathan Felighty. And this week I got kind of a big hitter, I would say, in the ag technology world, and got Scott Sexton, the CEO of EverAg. Thanks for being here. And I know it's been kind of, scheduling is tough with any of these things, and you're definitely a busy man, so I appreciate the time, especially on the 3rd, which is right before the 4th, which like nobody works this week. So
maybe that's why we were able to schedule it, Nathan. It's things slow down just enough to make it happen. But great to meet you, and look forward to chatting with you, and looking forward to the day here.
Yeah, no, for sure, and yes, you're probably right. Because there are some other colleagues I was talking to that don't really understand the ag side as much, and they're like, and they're kind of asking me, should we reach out this week? And I was like, don't touch anybody, like just internal meetings only this week, if even people are around. That's just how it works. So, and then it'll take a week for everybody to get back, and then nothing will get done till the 3rd week of July, and then it's already like the end of July, and time frames in ag are just funny like that, aren't they?
Sure is. Yeah. There's a few of us in the office here today, so it's that time of year where hard to pin folks down.
Yeah. Well, I think most people will take the lake or vacation usually when they can. So, but anyways, yeah. So thanks for being here. And, I guess to kick things off, this is kind of our first time meeting. I mean, I've been aware of you leading the charge over there, and all you guys have expanded in such a crazy way, like in a good way. But I guess tell people more that maybe don't know your kind of story, how you got into ag, who's Scott, I guess.
Well, Nathan, again, thanks for the opportunity to speak to your audience. I graduated Baylor University in the early 90s, had grown up around a food manufacturing environment. My father had run a large baking operation, publicly traded baking company that had 50 to 60 bakeries around the country. So grew up around, the procurement of ingredients and grain products and turning those into bread and grain-based products that are sold downstream. So very familiar with the food industry, graduated school, went into that sector, and was more in that raw material supply space. As the internet was beginning to emerge, I really felt like it was going to dramatically change how supply chain participants interacted with one another. And it really appeared to me that the internet as a backbone of data was going to be a movement. I feel like I was maybe 30 years early to the movement.
I get that 100%. When my dad builds a remote sensing company in the mid 90s based on web-based mapping, super smart idea. Love you, Dad, but
yeah. Well, trust me, I wasn't calling it cloud back then. It was just it was internet-based software, and then it became application service providers, and then it became vertical marketplaces, and then it became niche supply chain internet software, and now magically it's cloud. But we have been internet-based since the formation of the business back in '95, and so that gives a little bit of the roots into the food business, the emergence of the internet, the launch of an initial venture. It was just bootstrapped in the early days, kind of friends and family. Late 90s, we raised a little angel capital just to accelerate our growth. That was 98, 99. And then in 2000, there was a mad rush of really across all industries to how is the internet going to impact our industry. So a lot of it was defensive moves into the space, and without maybe the ability to execute on that. So a number of different food industry and commodity centric vertical marketplaces launched, there were 8 large dairy companies that formed a venture called Dairy.com. It was more a vision for commodity trading in the dairy vertical. And I knew some of those executives from my background in the food business, approached them, say, "Hey, I think we can help you power your venture." And it became pretty evident that there needed to be neutral, independent management coupled with their vision and liquidity. So I went from really broader Agri-Food into a very narrow focus. That would have been, we merged in 2000, merged the ventures together in 2000, and became solely focused on building out a vertical marketplace for commodity trading in the dairy industry. Their liquidity plus our platform know-how and independent management, we were profitable in about a year and a half, which very, very unusual to go from at a time when most of those ventures that launched didn't gain enough traction. Tech costs were very expensive. And so we that set the foundation of Dairy.com. And as folks begin to scatter from just internet-based software in general, I'd say we had about a 10-year stretch where we just began to spread across the value chain this digital backbone that connected the traders, the haulers, the regulators that interact with that commodity trade, and all those very unique purpose-built functional tools that don't fit really well within an enterprise system, but are really, really mission critical for the movement of commodities through the value chain. I could bore you with the complexity of dairy, but it really, for almost 2 decades, we just built out the venture. The foundation was really strong. I know you know this coming out of the ag tech space. It's not, I haven't seen a lot of rocket ships as far as how quickly things happen. And so we built a very solid foundation over a couple of decade period. In 2019, we brought in a growth partner, a growth capital partner. We exited some of the original shareholders and management plus the growth partner. We've been amidst a journey over the last 5 years of the transformation from what was Dairy.com into EverAg that plays in the major commodity sectors with supply chain software and risk management services. So happy to give you more detail as we go along, but that in a nutshell, that's my last 30 years in ag tech.
Well, I'm sure you could write a book on it, as some others that have been anyone in ag that has dealt with, I'd say, technology in any form or fashion, from, a simple website and then turning it into kind of these other behemoth infrastructure pieces, which I get that. It's, there's a lot to say. And, to your point, when, raising a little, angel funding, you've seen all the influx of money, the last 10 years or so, and none of that really even existed. And everything was bootstrapped. If you did get help, it's from a family member, maybe a colleague, someone you knew that had, a little extra money from something, we call them angels now. They're kind of maybe just a guy that had some money that you knew that was curious about your business. It's and it was just such a weird time. But to that point, you say you're getting profitable on that within a year and a half. From me kind of growing up in my side of it, and others I know too, you had to, it was do or die. There was no begging for investment. It's you make it work. You're out and about, you make it work, you get sales is your investment. And I get the newer mechanisms in developing tech is different and new, so you can't necessarily use those old ways. But I think there's a lot, and that's kind of why I think, I want to talk to people like yourselves that understand that, is to bring that perspective out of how hard it actually used to be and how different it used to be, but it also created these core people and groups that have had to accelerate and innovate where the industry is today. But do you get the big, pat on the back for developing stuff like that? No, like that doesn't happen. Everyone looks at, the latest, greatest raise of money, and all that's fine. But we tend to forget the past and the foundational tech pieces and people. So that's kind of, I want to talk more on that, just for how complex and hard some of that stuff is and what it takes.
It was it's a really interesting point. It was a different time, as you mentioned, the cost of tech and deploying tech, even hosting, the software development costs. There's just much more. There are way leaner ways to come to market now. I think what was interesting back then is, for me, is there was not the access to capital. It wasn't raining money. And so you literally had to take what you had raised and a sense, I would call it a sense of urgency for product market fit and commercial viability. And to me, it's one of the interesting things that I've seen as we've moved over, especially over the last 7 or 8 years, is because the cost of money was so much more affordable. And the food and agriculture space is a very, at least on the surface, a very attractive space. It's very large. It's kind of recession proof. People eat. There's massive complexity across the value chain that needs to be solved for. I think the reality that's bubbling underneath the surface is one of the bigger challenges in my view, and that is pace of adoption, not resistance to change, but just maybe a willingness, especially in a low margin, commodity centric value chain. There's not going to be excess dollars to plow towards innovation. So it makes it a really tricky equation to solve for. So capital comes in, it came in cheap. It's expecting a return. The pace at which you can find product market fit, scale, provide that return, and have the outcome that maybe outside capital is looking for creates a very interesting challenge for some of the startups.
Well,
go ahead.
I think, you can almost think about it. I grew up on a farm, and I think of farmers they're all gamblers. You're all just gambling. And it's like some of the, the earlier tech innovators, they were gambling, but they weren't just normal players. They weren't, as like online poker got super serious. Everyone was like playing Texas Hold'em because I can do this. This is fun. I can make a little money. That's almost like what it's felt like the last 10 years, all these groups coming in. I can make this bet, where you would always see on the World Series of Poker, the main guys that were always there, the top guys, because they knew how to place the right bets. And that takes a whole different mechanism in your head and how to think, and patience and bandwidth. Like that, my last podcast, we were talking about this, and I've been thinking about it more in ag. So much of the maybe expectations and money and perception that has come in is like tech can change this and this. We've been pushing in the bandwidth of what maybe tech has generally done with, these big hockey sticks, and ag just doesn't have the bandwidth for that, and how it works. It's a nice slow snail pace. We're not the high speed. We can't be. But we're expected to have this high intensity bandwidth when really, the cable that's holding all this together is huge. But the cable, the information through it's like an old copper line putting internet through. It has a limit. Ag is not a big fiber cable of information yet, even though it uses that technically. I'm running on it right now. But we're a big old cable that just always works. It's heavy. It sits there, but it moves slow, and it has a limited bandwidth on change. And I've been just thinking that way more.
Yeah.
You're nodding your head in agreement. So
Yeah, no, I think it's, and you mentioned some of the new capital that's come in, and I think some of the allure is the size of the space, and so there's, and I see a lot of pitch books, as you would imagine, folks that
mm-hmm.
either want to be part of EverAg, or just ventures that come across our plate. And as I peel back some of the market opportunity, I think, when you run just some basic math and some basic TAM calculations, it's, really, really significant as to what the opportunity is. I think translating that to ground game is to me, one of the harder parts. And the closer you get to charging the farm for technology, the more difficult I've found, or the slower the pace of that. So we've been very focused on enterprises that envelop the farm or serve the farm. And those are, to me, those have been really important mobilizers of our progress, because they're more enterprise focus, and they're the touch point, they're the service providers for that kind of last mile touch to the farm. So
well, I think there's a lot of time lost even when a lot of this money came into ag, like I said, 10, 7, 8 years ago, whatever you want to look at it, is, it was that direct push to farmers, and so much capital and money went towards that effort. And there's, there's some good reason to that. I get it. But it was kind of I don't want to call it was a wasted time effort to do that. It's just, I think many put too much focus on that being the core element of their business. And to your point, it's really hard. If I put my farmer cap on, which I can, I'll go around a trade show or whatever conference and see these new tech things, and I know inherently they're good and they're doing good things. I mean, heck, I work with one right now in FarmWave, trying to sell things directly to farmers, and I get it. But when anything that you sell to them, I mean, it has to be black and white, basically. On, off, it does X. Because interpretation of all this stuff is so problematic, especially, dealing with imagery. It's all interpretation. And how do you interpret something externally, like data, to a farmer where all their data is in their head, and you're like, well, I have a digital version of that. And they're like, yeah, but you don't, because I've been doing this for 30 plus years, or rancher or whatever. Like you kind of see some things, but the emotions and the passion, like you can't dive into that. You can't unlock it.
It's really an interesting, for me, and I know you probably attend conferences and you get exposure to a lot of different ventures and plays, and I've been doing it 30 years. I think I know how tech converges into the vertical, the food and the agri-food vertical. I walk away scratching, like, now what is that, and how does it work, and who's going to use that, and where's value created, and this is a world that, to your point, that especially as you get closer to the farming operation, it's like, it's got to be simple, quick, it's got to make sense, it's got to have high impact, easy to use. And so I think some of that theoretical, how it converges with, and in some cases, the ability of the industry to adopt, not only do they need to understand it, but then the adoption, the deployment, the support. I've seen a lot of ventures that, you great ideas for automation with this IoT device, but then it's like, well, hang on a second, we didn't think about that's going to get clogged up with milk components, or there's going to be manure that has, and so it's like some of the complexities that you run into. I really call it the ground game becomes really, really difficult. And then the other thing I see is a lot of these micro focus. You need micro focus for innovation, but then scaling a business around potentially what is a feature. That's why you see some larger players like us and a couple of others that have the ability to kind of drop these capabilities into more of a unified offering set. And I think that's going to become increasingly important, because stability of who you're partnered with, and then breadth of capabilities to not have to have 15 different vendors and shepherding all of those projects for some of these larger agribusiness enterprises becomes really, really critical. So it's, as I mentioned, it's, we need the innovation. Capital for the innovation is somewhat challenged because the return profiles get, are difficult. And then trying to build a business sometimes around features becomes, what should be a feature of maybe a broader system of record starts to become challenging as well. So there's a lot of dynamics to unpack there, but it's definitely a needed innovation, but a challenging environment nonetheless.
Yeah, and I've with even where I came in, when I previously worked and then came in to TELUS on the ag integrated side, when trying to translate that, it's like it's so needed. It was needed by all these people. It's still used, and there's other groups doing it in some methods too, or people build their own. It's kind of this core infrastructure that's everybody wants and needs for certain things to translate X file to X file. That's proprietary ag data and the workflows and all that. But to your point, it's kind of one piece of the puzzle, and creating a business around just that, while it was, and it did, and it got acquired and all that, continuing that and to grow it into where others want, like there's just like a fine-tuned limit to what that function can really gain in the marketplace it's meant for, because there really was a limit. I mean, and it's not hundreds of millions of dollars. It's just not that. It can't be that. But then at the same time, you can create something that as a function, like from what I've dealt with on the imagery side on satellites, like, oh, you could do it globally. It's like it's everywhere, and you can create a business model like anywhere. But then it's too much. Like there's too much you're trying to cover, and you can't focus. And so there's like a nice little middle ground. So to your point, yeah, you've had to kind of basically, find the right capital, put these right bigger pieces together, and then kind of add those kind of functional pieces up and down. And so maybe let's talk a bit about more of that on the kind of because I think it's an interesting to talk through on what you guys have done on the EverAg side. Because honestly, like when like the news release, like you said, in 2019 came in, and you bought what is it, Ag Junction, or the software around that, and became, or EFC, or turned into that. I'm going way back with names even. And I know a lot of people in my side of more the precision ag side were like, who the hell is dairy.com? And what's going on here? And we're like, cool, great. But it was, I mean, and clearly it's been working, but like what kind of set you into thinking like, hey, we need to go there?
Yeah.
As well.
Inquiring minds want to know, it seems like. So,
oh, of course. Yeah. Why not?
It's quite simple, really. If you look at the playbook in the dairy vertical, we've built out the family of solutions across the end-to-end value chain that unifies and unlocks data, makes it frictionless, enter once, use where it's needed across the value chain, and have scaled that business. Really the leading provider in the dairy vertical, and then against that, what we've applied are, when you're dealing with physical flows, you're also dealing with risk, and so we have an engine called Vault that scenario plans risk, helps you execute and mark to market your hedging positions to ensure financial viability. To manage physicals and derivatives, you need top-notch market intelligence. So we have a division across all the sectors that assimilate and curate the critical content around what's happening in the markets, what should you be doing with your physicals and derivatives. So we had refined that playbook in dairy. With our growth partner, as we laid out our growth strategy, you start to look at what's sitting right before kind of an animal production or milk production operation, and you have that seed to feed value chain.
Mm-hmm.
And then what's happening at the end of the life cycle of a milking cow, they move into the animal protein value chain. So really what we found is kind of one step before, one step after, there was tremendous opportunity. You zoom out, you look at that ecosystem, highly interconnected. Each sector is nuanced. So if you look at kind of the cropping operations and traditional row crop operations, you mentioned EFC, right? That was critical. We want to enable those trusted providers to the growers. And then we need, which was the EFC merchant ag product. Then as you get into the growing operation, you've got the Field Analytics digital agronomy platform. We've added now to that. We have a grain hauling platform called Roger. Roger that it's utilized by some of the largest grain players in the country. And then we have, I call it midstream procurement and processing software that may be running an elevator, a feed mill, a commodity trading operation. So you've seen a similar playbook over in building out kind of core digital end-to-end plumbing. And then same thing over in the animal protein. We've been heavily focused in the swine sector as our first species of expansion, but we do everything from, the kind of the feed mill, feed allocation, ration balancing, pig farm operations, all the way through the procurement of livestock into those integrated packers. So it's this theme, Nathan, of building out end-to-end digital plumbing and removing some of the friction and unifying the data. Now, once you've gotten that unified, now there's some really interesting things you can begin to layer on. Yeah. We have a data science and optimization platform. We have a sustainability platform. So those are the capabilities. But in a nutshell, to answer your question, we've zoomed back out and we've looked at the broader agri-food ecosystem, and we've started to make some of those key acquisitions, and we've been assimilating capabilities under the EverAg banner.
Well, and to that is, when I look at it talks about in the general kind of public is, CPGs will talk about it all the time. Well, I want to know, the consumer wants to know exactly where this comes from. And I was talking to someone the other day. I was like, yes, there is that trope out there of, I want to know where XYZ comes from. And for different products, dairy is going to be different because it's like, oh, direct from cow, hear this, but then they want to know what was fed, what kind of, vaccines or whatever it's got, how much it's been in the field, things like that. Then you jump into maybe the grain side, for pasta or something. And to the point I was telling them is like, they want that specialty pasta to get that 1% consumer and look like they're doing all this. But for the most part, everyone wants, Kraft Heinz sells a lot of mac and cheese, and my kids are just going to eat mac and cheese. They don't care. But the point I'm trying to bring up is the CPGs want these interwoven connected parts. The ag retailers want to provide that to them to the level they can. The different service providers want to too, but each one of them building their own things, pieces is insanely hard to do. And yeah, you kind of need to build this mountain of a complex for any of them to be interested, because, to your point, the dairy guys are here, but they're like, yeah, but I also grow, silage, corn, and put seed in the ground with a planter and deal with normal other agronomic stuff. So I need that feed in to appease to my milk buyers, because they want to know where they were fed and with what, and what was in that feed, what was sprayed on it. And you cannot, that dairy group then becomes kind of like, well, we're going to bill it if you don't, and we don't want to, we don't want to pay you unless you have these other components, or we won't do the contract, or a newer vendor won't do a contract unless you have the potential to make that connection point. Like, has to be in place.
Honestly, it's where the puck's going. And to your point, I think your point's a really important one that, many consumers are like, hey, I just want the product to taste good. And they're not wanting to x-ray the chain of custody and the value chain. Some consumers do. Some retailers are heavily committed to those sustainability or traceability initiatives. And that's important. We need to have preparedness to deal with that. I think what's been interesting is you've seen, I'm sure you tracked it a few years ago, blockchain and all the different initiatives of, we're going to have end-to-end traceability, which I think naturally would make sense to, hey, that we should have that. The problem is, where do you levy the tax in the value chain for those services? Because in some regards, even if someone's willing to fund it initially, we've all been around enough to know that there's some of these mirage premiums that prompt maybe early action, but then become table stakes as we go. So what we've been more focused on is, you nailed it. It's the building out of this ecosystem, this interconnected, complicated ecosystem with key systems of record that essentially can yield that chain of custody data or transparency or genealogy data. Maybe it's fueling primary data for sustainability initiatives, but it's almost the offshoot of commercially viable underlying capabilities. And I think we believe it'll be the winning approach, because at the end of the day, you need to have business tools, optimization tools that yield ROI, and they should be creating the genealogy of these products. And so that's been a lot of our focus. And I think what I've seen with many of these, maybe traceability alone or blockchain alone, there's a trouble with who's going to fund that. And so they tend to run into, where do I generate revenue for an overlay traceability platform?
Well, and I think a lot of, even, from my world of it, all the different little called mini farm management softwares and apps, and, it's been on the animal side too, and all sorts of pieces. And you got to start somewhere. But even, some are trying to sell this unique thing, small thing. And we used to be able to do it. Like from the imagery side of my world, I used to be able to sell just an ag retailer or a co-op this core imagery product. It works with imagery grade. It does all the things you need to do, and even at scale and all this. And that's how it had to start. And then you had one that dealt with more yield data and this type of thing here. Then you have your ERP system here that just does that stuff. And then you have this side for, moving grain or handling grain, just this part. And everyone kind of worked on their islands, and that was the only way you could do it. Literally, that was the only way you could do it, because interconnectivity, webhooks, APIs, you name it, really just didn't exist in those days. You just couldn't. It didn't matter how hard you tried. Like, we even had early APIs, and people were like, we have no idea what to do with that. Can you send us like an FTP document or something? It's like, no, dude, like, we can't. No, sorry. But, that's clearly changed, and it's going to get even crazier. And, so I still see some of these kind of smaller niche softwares, and they can still fit into the marketplace and niche in different areas. Because, a good instance, like last week, I just talked to large potato farm and kind of their operation. And they have some unique things that maybe are only unique to them. And building this, for a group like you to build a whole entire segment just for them, for what they need, is maybe not the right move to do. Because, they have a certain buyer, they have a certain thing, and it's different. Or edible beans. I grew up around that a lot. they have their own little things, and sometimes you need those little more localized things that kind of handle that. Yeah, I'm guessing you see a lot of the same around.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is you're beginning to hit on the high value specialty type sector. I think that may be one of the more challenging of all of them, just because of
Hmm.
what you just mentioned. There are 30 to 50 micro markets that all have slightly different motions, not enough scale. So that one may be one of the more challenging ones versus kind of these larger sectors. If you look at gross cash farm income, you've got some larger sectors where you can have more harmonized, not out of the box, because we tend to find many of the operations have nuances you need to be able to tailor your offerings to, but at least the mainline offering that you're providing into a dairy sector, a row crop sector, or a pork, swine, cattle sector. You've got different capabilities that can be used at broad scale versus the high value specialty crop players. One other thing I want to go back to that you were just hitting on, um, recently, almost every meeting from some of the larger agri-food players is they are fatigued with a portfolio of point solutions that they're having to harness themselves. And so again, one of the major reasons we've been investing so heavily in building EverAg is to unify and unlock data across a broad set of features and capabilities that some of the larger players are looking for single vendor capabilities
Yeah.
across a broader set of areas of your business needs. So it's really beginning to change as it relates to opportunities for EverAg and maybe some of the larger end-to-end software providers.
Well, and I even wonder, and I've clearly, like I said before, everyone could kind of build their own niche area system like you did on the dairy side, and to start, and how it's evolved. And then, early on, let's say, yeah, starting 10 years ago, there's like, oh, let's get all this data to the grower. Well, it's like, well, they didn't really want to deal with it either. And it's like, okay, then it all of a sudden the shift went to, okay, B2B focus. So everyone's building B2B and ag, and we'll be your platform, we'll be your big solution, we'll be this. And really, for a while there, nobody could be any of it. Like, what they really needed was, more of a cohesive things. And that's why, you guys have come into it where I was at before TELUS Ag. They're, bringing in this big group. Others are they're kind of coming together with these other smaller groups that are more maybe it's more specialty crop things. I can't think of the name of the other one, but they're more doing that on the specialty side. You see that in other areas, but it begs this question to me. And I think it's something for, I suppose, investors or other startups to just think of this. If you're trying to go B2B these days, you better either go for very defined niche that you know really well, and there's something big missing that no one's doing. Because if you're trying to go after the traditional B2B players right now, it's almost too late, isn't it? Because of all the other pieces that, groups like yourselves and others that have kind of fine-tuned into kind of this more larger product that the CPGs want. Well, if the CPGs want more of a unified product, the largest ag retailers want more of a unified product. Their local everything, they want that too. Like, are we done? Is there any room even in the large markets of B2B, not the specialty, but the large markets?
It's a really astute point, and I think one of the things you you mentioned kind of the flashy new startups, and hey, so and so just raised money. We've kind of been in this zone of just the boring, right? It's, hey, what are those mission critical, I use them every day platforms that generally have, maybe over a couple of decades, similar to dairy.com, they became highly utilized across sectors. That's been the profile that we've been focused on. And to your point, there was a bit of a window where those assets came together under EverAg, and a very intentional focus on those really mission critical systems that drive a business. And from those core platforms, you can begin to innovate, add capabilities, add features, add optimizers. You can really begin to extract next level value from them. I think your question around has that window come and gone? I'm not of the opinion that you shouldn't innovate or there's not new ways to go about things. I think the reality that you face if you're launching net new into some of those sectors is back to the what I call the ground game and the pace of adoption, and what does it cost you to build the next new thing, and then how quickly can you ramp it? And I think it ties ultimately back to that capital structure of the more pressure you've put on a startup with that capital, the more pressure you have to move faster, which may not be a reality, especially when you're saying, hey, someone that's utilizing something from XYZ big ag tech provider, let's rip that out, replace it because this one feature, they're still going to be sitting there saying, okay, I just changed the hubcap. I really need the entire vehicle to take me where I'm going, which there's been a few of us that are playing more in that end-to-end set of capabilities. So I think it's challenging, but I wouldn't say it's, I think innovation is going to be really important. I think folks like us are hyper focused on innovation and what's the next chapter. But it becomes much easier to focus on that from a position of these critical systems of record that are already in place.
No, that's a good point, and maybe as a way to think of it on in a simpler term for others is so like my pickup is it's got all the modern bells and whistles, but it's an LT, it's a base edition. Now that version 20 years ago clearly doesn't have a lot of those things, from safety features to environmental stuff to fuel injection even and stuff like that. But there's nothing fancy about it. It does its job. It does these things. Now, can I go out and buy some nice, big, shiny new rims for it and add in a big, huge new grill guard and all these extra things? Yes. And are there opportunities for groups to create those things? Yes. At the end of the day, while there's a market there too, the majority of people are just going to leave the thing stock. And it's like the majority of people just kind of want the stock OEM play that has slowly just increases over time with, to your point, other functions, other core things. And you guys can kind of be like, we're just kind of going along, adding little things. You're not making a big show of it because that's just the progression of technology and nature and business. But you also need those, show ponies kind of on the bottom end that, make things look a little cooler, nicer. And that helps push you too, to be like, oh, I mean, a great example, I know, the software world, especially, some of them are, they look like they're 20 years old. Some of the software out there, does it function and work great? Absolutely. But it looks old or it doesn't, the UI UX side of it maybe needs a little revamp, but as the bigger you get, that can be harder to do. And it costs a lot of money and time, as you know.
In a sector that a lot of times says, listen, just give me mission critical. And by the way, completely agree with you that the innovation and the upgrading and looking forward matters. But also, what we've been really focused on is, against that core, you talked about, the base model, right? We know we can get things done. What are some of the overlay or what are some of the connecting the dots that truly start to unlock significant ROI? Because, you may, I got a cooler interface over here in this, but sometimes what I found, Nathan, the users, the ones that are they actually are like, don't move my cheese. Like just
true. Yep.
I know how to use it. It works. It yields the data. So, there's, I think you can there is also a trap of, oh, no, it's got to be the coolest UI because
Yes.
I experienced this with this app. And again, we need to modernize, we need to be moving that direction, but we also need to focus on what are the real value drivers, and how do we tap into those, quick time to value, right? That's a major focus for our enterprise, because at the end of the day, you can be swimming in this data, but if you don't point it to true business value and return, why are you doing that, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a real balancing act in the kind of the shiny new versus how do we really get to the business value.
Well, and so many things so many newer softwares can get, and I mean, I experienced this firsthand for not only trying to develop a newer UI UX that was kind of sexier in a sense, especially on the imagery side, when we had this awesome thing that ran perfect. It was simple. Then we're like, oh, let's get into like Google Earth just came out with the globe things. Like we need like a 3D thing, and I'll fight tooth and nail with my dad on this, and he'll call me after this publishes, and we'll have a nice conversation. And it's like, yeah, I don't know, people really need that. Like, that's cool. We have this very good functioning thing that a lot of groups were used to. And then we slowly realized that the 3D thing was probably not the best thing. We just weren't, and no one was really ready for it. And then but we took then 3 more years to develop just the UI when all the back end components were all exactly the same. And we spent all this extra time building the UI. Now, it's good we did in hindsight because it's needed now, but because it also hasn't changed for a while. But it's also then we realized there is no point in changing it, because do you want to cause yourself more harm than good? If you only have 5% of your users saying, oh, I need this button here, you need to change this whole interface, I need it to look this way. And if you're so focused on just the 5%, unless they're writing checks that are 95% of the revenue, sorry, we're not changing. And that's a hard balance, though, because perception of new and sexy apps and how they look it's a challenge amongst certain users, especially the younger generation gets.
Yeah, no, the expectations are going to only get higher and higher just because technology is so pervasive in so many forms, and the interfaces and the look and feel. So it's not to minimize it, but I think you hit on, again, one of the key points, which is the willingness to invest in that. So I think users want it. So I think it's why you see some large scale players like ourselves that are able to now assimilate and have kind of an effective cost structure across all the sectors, all the solutions, all the capability sets, because our ability to invest in that becomes, we can deliver that at a price point maybe that is more difficult for someone that, yeah, you can, as a startup, you can deliver some of that, but how quickly can you scale and get to sustainability and profitability in your operation? That's been a bit of the trick, but technology is becoming more affordable. It's easier to develop quicker. So I don't underestimate innovation. I mean, I was the crazy one back in the very early days. People saying, "What are you doing?" So I really encourage those entrepreneurs and folks. I see a lot of just excellent young entrepreneurs that are passionate about the space, and as I am, and much of our organization has come out of the farming or food sector. So there's a real desire to see our industries advance. It's not, it's, you called it rocket ship or hyper growth. I just haven't seen a lot of that through the years. It's just more steady as she goes. We need to innovate, but we're not gonna. So it just, back to the capital structure, makes it a little challenging. If you raise heavy on the front end, put a lot of pressure, and then you can't scale at the clip that outside capital demands.
Well, and to that point, I think, one challenge that I think a lot of people would be interested to hear about, and I kind of experienced it in my past gig of, you're bringing in other groups, other core sector places, like you've said. But you also have to bring them in. You have to bring in those employees. You have to bring in those passionate leaders and kind of manage them. We kind of highlighted a little bit before the call. And, while all the things you're putting together is great and there's a want and need, you have this back end, just human problem almost. It's not a technical thing. It's not even necessarily a money thing. It's an emotional strain that ag is. I think we're not talking about it enough in the broad sense of ag, of all the emotional changes for, think of land is going to change, all the land that's going to change hands in the next 20 years from baby boomers going out. And then a lot of these people, I think from the USDA to ag retailers to politics, there's a whole generation in ag that's not going to be there in the next 5, 10, 20 years. But you still need to bring in new people. We're like, the emotional state of ag is very fragile right now, and bringing in, whether it's a startup or an established software from your end, like maybe talk through a little bit more of that, because you've experienced it, time and time again.
Yeah, at least from our vantage point, I know we chatted prior to the recording started, but you've lived it, right? So you went from a startup, and then you were acquired, and then you lived through the difficulty of that. We've had a number of acquisitions. We've brought in strong leaders. I'm proud to say that those leaders have found a home and an environment where they're deeply valued, because if there's anything I've learned from my 3 decades now in the ag tech space is, I know a lot just from having that frog in a boiling pot, having been there for so long. That is true for the leaders in each of our different sectors, divisions, offerings. And so we have put a premium on, listen, this is a great home. It's a place for you to innovate, for you to drive forward with now more resource, more horsepower. You don't have to go figure it all out, because we've got these functional best practices, but we value and we put at the forefront those that know the sectors, those that lead those sectors, that have the relationships in those sectors, that have the vision for what the tools and capabilities should be. We're just trying to bolster that with, I know from my experience at dairy.com and what I've learned over the last 5 years with a really excellent growth capital partner, there's so many things, Nathan, I had no clue about. And it's not to beat up, because, I was able to help build the foundation with a great team of what became dairy.com. But my team has learned so much because we only had homegrown knowledge. And I mean, we brought in good leaders and capabilities, but so I think it's the art of how do you bring together those domain experts that are passionate, that have a real vision, and then provide that foundation of functional and best practice capabilities. And I think where some of the over rotation has happened, where you see things break, it's where the playbooks become more important than the people and the face of the.
I agree. Like if you can't provide the other people are bringing with a sense of like purpose, and you're just here and like, just go over and do whatever, like they need to have a drive. And I've definitely felt that.
and to your point, like, I think if you were to ask any of the founders of companies that have become part of the EverAg family, what they're going to tell you is, wow, it's like a burst of energy, what could be, like, what's the future? How do we take, and by the way, you've got this data science platform. Okay, how do I plug it here? Or you've already figured out digitizing logistics. Let me plug that in here. And then now we'll activate from the feed mill into this. So you get the sense like there's this, it's all, honestly, it's almost like, okay, the bigger challenge is not, am I valued? Do they want me here? It's how do I prioritize
Yeah.
what I'm
Yeah.
going to focus on, because I'm going to drown here if I try to do too much with what's already under roof within our enterprise now.
Well, I would see it as if I, putting on my kind of a business owner cap coming in, and I kind of experienced this from coming in and from my previous thing is you see all these other groups that are within. You're like, oh, we could do something here, we could work something there, and then that prioritization becomes, oh crap, that's like 4 years out. You get so excited and you're like, oh, I could do all these things. And then, then reality comes behind you and punches you in the back of the head. And then it becomes kind of deflating. And I'm sure that, that's happened on your end. It's like, oh, let's connect this right away. Like, yeah, we got like 100 things before that. Sorry. But
well, to that point, the businesses that have become part of EverAg are healthy, growing, capable platforms. And so not only, so we are peering into the what's next, where do we want to make investments, but we have massive deployments of what I would call core digitization that's still happening. Why? Because we're meeting these sectors at different states of maturity, and there are still either very aged systems or manual processes. And so, we spend a lot of time thinking about the future and what we can do, but there's still just the base layer, which it's almost funny to say that after being 30 years in, for me to say we may still be very early innings of just core digitization of stuff that's still on paper or still manual, or you don't. And so I think to me, it's what makes ag tech exciting, is because a little bit of a late adoption and slower adoption cycles, there's tremendous upside for our industry in just digitize and then begin to really harness that data with advanced analytics that move the needle in significant ways in their business.
Well, and it's one of the things why I've kind of done, trying to do this podcast in a way is, to that point, we are at the early stages really of tech involvement in agriculture. I mean, there's all these articles and this is going to happen, and this is the future of ag, and every year there's like, this is the future of ag, and it's something else. Then you look back, like they said that 15 years ago. It's like, cool, great. But one of the, it's at a snail's pace, and there's going to be turnover, like I was saying, a lot in the next 10, 20 years, people retiring, getting out. Heck, maybe people just being tired of trying to win the battle. I mean, I feel like that way all the time. It's like, oh, you're just in it. And, you're trying to get to these upper echelons, and, some can make it a certain way, some can't. And I worry though, that there's this element of burnout, especially from investors. You're seeing that now. There's burnout right now of just saying, we're going to put money into ag. Like, and they're like, I don't know if we're going to put money into ag. It hasn't turned out. And there's, I think this fear, at least I feel it and see it, that there's a fear of people not understanding how this has all kind of evolved. And if we just go look back the last 5 years or 10 years with all this money coming in, we forget where some of these foundational pieces come up. And were they perfect? Did they have tough times? Did not everyone make it? Of course, that's how the world works. But if the investors and people that want to progress technology and ag don't understand kind of how it grows slowly, because I don't think they have. A lot of outsiders haven't understood that. And we all need to do a better job of, I think, talking about that and maybe being more forefront about that, is, saying to those lead investors, the CPGs, the marketing groups, whatever, the large input groups, like, guys, yes, we'll get there, We have to take it slow. You have to trust the process. We can't rush it. You can't just disrupt it. That was what's wanted. And now we need to we have to teach the others that, it doesn't work that way. You have to progress slowly. It's like people forget it or they don't know. And that's my fear is just because money has kind of gone down, groups haven't made it, they've overpromised, underdelivered, that we're going to miss out on another chunk of 10 years where we don't progress because we're too scared.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. In the investment cycle, money was cheap. The TAMs were big to go after. The pitch books were glossy, and there were good ventures that were launched through that period. Again, you nailed it. This a bit of the slow adoption pace really puts pressure into that equation. And then, as we've talked, having a base operating system that you can build around and build from is really quite critical into this sector, and healthy recurring revenue streams, and not needing outside capital to rain down to kind of fund operations. But anything that takes a longer period than a few years to get at product market fit in a capital efficient way, I think any investor should really be peeling back. I would encourage an investor that's looking into the space to really peel back those tam, sam, sam, what's available, what can we go get after in the near term, what is the true pace of adoption, what's the compelling event, what's the ROI for some of these tools, because that's been the Achilles heel of this last investment cycle. I'm optimistic about the space. I mean, I think there's just tremendous upside for EverAg. I know we're very well positioned. We're at scale. We're at profitability. We understand the sectors. We have an incredible team under roof that can help attack the different sectors that we play in. There's opportunity to expand into other sectors, but we have a very disciplined growth mindset and approach, and we know how to allocate capital around the key initiatives that we think will move the needle for our clients. We've made some key investments in next gen, data science platforms, sustainability platforms. We're not over rotating on the sustainability side. It's going to be important, but it's not, we're at the heart of who we are. It's a technology and services provider. And that's, yes, it'll yield some of these capabilities in the sustainability arena. But at the end of the day, we've kind of stuck to our knitting. It's not been terribly glamorous at times. And, we've brushed, as you probably know from the early days, you kind of brush past, really tricky places where you could fall off, but really proud of the 30-year history of what we've built, and never been more optimistic for the ag sector, the food sector. You talked about burnout. One of the things that I've just been amazed by, that I'm so proud of, is, I see energized people in each of the sectors that around EverAg, because this, you grew up around a farming operation. I grew up around a food manufacturing operation. There's this real affinity for the hardworking farmers and operators and haulers, and people have a real pride in bringing food to market, and so despite the ups and downs and bumps and bruises, I see it with the founders. I see it with even the new team that we've added, people new into the sector. They really love that affinity for feeding the world. And I know that's cliche, but I can tell you, we one of our gentlemen that leads our market intelligence division, he calls it kind of the grocery store geeks. Like, we'll walk through the grocery store and we're like, oh my gosh, look, did you see that label and that ingredient? Probably, we're proud of that, and we feel humbled to be a part of that, and really, it's something that I think keeps people both passionate, energized through the ups and downs, and but you're right, it's tough sledding at times, just because the pace of adoption can be challenging.
Yeah, and I mean, that's I think another thing that, I mean, it's maybe it's more affected me just because I've been around it long, and I'm still generally young, just like an old soul, old fart with a youngish face, I guess. Aging fast because of it and losing my hair at a young age. That's just the way it is. I'm getting too personal now, but so on that, one, I've been hearing it more. I've been talking about it more, even myself. And like so there's kind of this weird little downturn in ag right now. Although this is just what happens to me. It's like, oh, it's just a cycle of prices go down. It's not all doom and gloom. Yes, it's unfortunate. Some of the OEMs and groups are laying off a bunch of people. Everyone's kind of preparing for, they don't know what's going to happen because, it's an election year and it's like the biggest one ever. Of course, every election year is the biggest one ever. And it's always that, and the world keeps on spinning. I hope that continues. But one thing I've heard more people talking about, and curious on your take on this, is, because you're working with some of these, these larger groups, they have to evolve their own way. Hence why some of them have had to lay off staff. They're evolving into something else. They're seeing something else. And I think there's been a lot of worry on, production from, say, North America shifting to other parts of the globe. I mean, it's always been a fear. And I'm seeing, places like in Brazil and in Africa and India, they went from basically, I mean, in some areas for sure, like almost like subsistent farming to like industrial farming overnight in retrospective time, 10 years, 20 years. It's not these like, they've changed so fast where we've had this like slow growth thing. And that can be troublesome in its own realm of just expansion and infrastructure. I mean, that's where the problems exist. But I think there's also this fear of, and I've talked about it, especially in the U.S., because it seems like the adoption it's like there, but it's on the tech side, it's just really not there too. It's kind of stagnant. It depends on what it is. And I think even from the service provider side and retailers and XYZ, there's a stagnation there too, almost of what level they can bring in tech into their organizations. But other parts of the world are going full bore. What are you seeing? Like, I can only imagine you're seeing some of that too. But yeah.
Yeah, certainly. I think you hit on it. There's cycles, right? So there's kind of the ups and downs. It's when I talked about getting close to the edge at times. It tends to run in some of these cycles. One of the things we've been very focused on is just a diversified set of sectors and offerings that have we've steadily grown through each phase of challenging cycles or economic environments or geopolitical issues. We've been able to steadily grow. I am a firm believer the U.S. is very well positioned to be a supplier to the world. Yeah, there will be different geographic regions that will pop up with capabilities, and for us, it's why we monitor the global environment so much across our sectors, because if you aren't responsive to in your physicals or derivatives to those changes, you're not going to be in a good in a good spot. But we've really focused more on it's the long game. It's the steady, reliable provider at the appropriate price point. It may not be a rocket ship year in, year out, but being that rock solid, steady supplier with innovation, investing in innovation that help our clients. Because you nailed it, the adoption life cycle is going to be a bit slower. We're a laggard in certain sets of capabilities that we adopt, but we will get there. I'm a firm believer we'll get there. I see a lot of progressive large enterprises, as you've mentioned, that are really leaning into, in particular, there's a lot of interest in data science, machine learning, those that are further along in the maturity curve of having underlying digital data that can be harnessed. We're seeing more of that. I'm seeing innovation in the freight and logistics sector. So we are trying. It doesn't happen overnight, as you've stated, but we're, I'm bullish that we're well positioned to help the industry continue to move along on that, in that adoption cycle.
Do you think, with that, what I've been trying to, tell some of my friends that farm and all that is, because with farmers, it's tougher to adopt tech. It almost needs to be built into the process, um, like no farmer knows who the hell you guys are, really. But that's a good thing in a sense. It needs to come through, your
trusted providers, right? The trusted providers.
Your providers, your clients. It needs to come through in their way and their level. When I see my friends say like, "Oh, we tried this thing here," I'm like, "Well," and then I'm like, "Did you know this, and this, and this, and this, and this?" And like I tell them the story, and they're like, "Yeah, I don't care." And I'm like, "But I like, can you please care? Because that was so hard for just all these things. It's so hard for that to come together, like, and have an appreciation." And I kind of wish, I feel like some farmers in other areas of the world that have been kind of getting into it faster maybe appreciate some of that more than maybe here in the States, where it's been like, it just becomes part of everything, and others have had to kind of evolve faster to try to catch up. I wish there was just more of that kind of thought process. I think of insurance. I used to work in crop insurance for a while, and I knew all the different AIPs, and there's different groups that manage the softwares under there, or different people. And you'd ask a farmer, "Well, what's your insurance?" They're like, "I don't know. I just go through my agent," and they have no concept of how the whole process works. And I'm like, it's really antiquated and nuanced, and you should learn these things. Like, nah, let's talk to my guy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think what you're highlighting, Nathan, is the importance of those trusted partners into the farming operations. And it's really where we've leaned in heavily, just with enabling those firms with offerings that touch those farms, or maybe that get activated for those farms. It gets harder when you start to get into a pure FMIS, or because the farming operations are, they're independent operations. They're going to make their business management and software decisions as needed. But there are some innovations that can be brought onto those farms via different channels that accomplish what we need to as the industry, but doesn't place the burden right at the foot of that producer to either know all the answers, make the decisions, know the direct application. And you said something earlier that I think it was really insightful. It's kind of like easy button, punch this, and it's affordable, it helps them, and it's within the context of how they think about their business. And I think sometimes we show up and they're like, "No, what is this? And I'm overregulated already, and who's going to pay me for this?" And I'm, so I get the fatigue, and I get the skepticism, but I have not lost hope that we'll continue to advance, because I see true innovation happening in many pockets. I have the good fortune of being able to look across different sectors, and there's a lot of exciting stuff that we can be doing as an industry. But it's that channel, that advisor, that trusted partner that I think plays a really critical role in innovation for on behalf of those growers and producers.
Well, and as we've been talking too, it's kind of, everyone wants like that adoption curve to go up like the hockey stick. That's always been talked about. And well, it's basically impossible, really. It just is. And I'll complain about adoption, and everyone will, in all these tech sites. It doesn't matter what it is. Maybe it could be robotics, it could be biologicals, it could be analytic, this data set, that. And I mean, honestly, we're just a very impatient industry as a whole. I don't think that's always been inherent, though. I almost think it's like there's an outside driving force, and some of it's political or regulations, like you said. It's like, I mean, look at the last administration when it came in, like day one, all of a sudden, sustainability, environmental, and all that it just rocketed up, and overnight, and then everyone's got to like catch up and catch up to that hockey stick of perception of, oh, we have to get here. Well, we're not there. Like, no one's there. If anything, we made it even more complex because you're trying to make an ag industry that works slow, try to figure out how it's sustainable or regenerative in a matter of months, if not years. And people shifted everything towards that. And I know at the ground level, I mean, farmers I know have no-tilled for 30 years, but like I've been doing this, like no one's paying me to do it really. I mean, there's some programs and, these cycles in just the perception of what ag needs to change like that. I mean, for working on the CPG side, the expectations, I would imagine from the dairy side, it's like, yeah, all of a sudden we need it to be this way. And as like a software builder, like, yeah, I don't like, that's going to take me 2 years to develop to even get to the point of managing this data that you want today. Like, how do you deal with that? I mean, what's your thoughts all around that?
Yeah, so years ago, so we've been under the just kind of these kind of vision of more digital, real-time, transparent supply chains are going to win. They're going to be the foundation, and the adoption cycles and the ups and downs, as we've mentioned, we can't always control that. So as I've looked at that, real-time, digital, transparent value chains and building out that plumbing, that's been our hedgehog. That's been our core focus. And what we've tried to do is lay it out in a way where many times we get so fixated, as you just mentioned, on the end state. Got to be here fast.
Mm-hmm.
That's difficult in agriculture, and so we've focused more on I call them these transition paths or transition technologies. Just get on the path. I mean, the overarching theme, you're moving the right direction. Yes, the journey may be a bit slower, but you're on the right path, and have fortitude and be willing to kind of step in and encourage your organizations to deal with change and change management. As we get our clients on that path, we'll get to the end state. And you talk about some of the hype of sustainability, ESG. When I mentioned earlier, we're not over rotating, but we do have to have an eye on the fact that these are real movements and real initiatives that are in place. And so you just want to make sure that you've got the right partner, you're on that journey, you're in that transition path that's going to get you to where you need to be. So it's kind of how we've dealt with it, and we can't necessarily control, like in the last couple of years, everything's Chat GPT and this, and I'm kind of like, well, maybe we get off paper before we start thinking about how your Chat GPT is going to actually.
I'm going to use that little slogan in like my little clip of showcasing this next week. It's like, yeah, I mean, ag is so bad at that. I literally just put like my own self episode out last week, bitching about CLUs and common land units and ag. And it's like literally how most of things are reported to the government is by pen and paper, writing a little boundary on a piece of paper. It's literally how it's done, and a little scribble of how the farmer writes it on there. And it's like, it's maddening that that's reality. But yet there's also initiatives within the same organizations that manage these things. I'll complain about the government right now, even though there's good and bad. The government does. We all know it. We love and hate it. It's needed. It's not needed in other areas. But it's pushing this thing. It's like, oh, we need to do this. It's like, yeah, guys, but the way you do it now in the thing that is spread across everywhere is old. How do you expect how do you expect within, like, I'll just say the USDA, and I mean other governments, this is a problem worldwide, I think, is you have this rule of doing this, and then you're saying, well, you need to do this now, and it's a political game. I get it. And I mean, you can't unless they change their ways. Like, we're stuck. Like, I feel like some of the tech adoption, and you guys are starting to learn this more. You guys grabbed agency route, and I'm sure those guys they know that very well. Is how can, on the software side, you're like, you can only wait so long. It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, okay, this can be done, this can be done, this can be done. Everyone wants it, and then nothing happens. Maybe it's a jobs thing, maybe it's something else. I guess maybe more of the question is, because I think you guys are gearing up for that. You're prepared for it well. But what are other things like that you've noticed that, just for other groups in tech and software and ag, like any things that you've realized over years of dealing with that? Because clearly you've had to deal with it.
I think it just comes down to, really meeting organizations where they are in their maturity curve, right? And just, you mentioned a little bit about government systems. We, of course, have an eye to how do we activate information that matters to them. So you enter it once, use it with the appropriate permissions where they need to be used. But it's a journey, and let's start where you are on the journey. I would say we certainly don't sit back expecting necessary. There'll be regulation, and in some sectors you see hard regulation that comes in, i.e. the produce sector and the produce traceability initiative. And then other sectors, you see them say, hey, we have the Boy Scout pledge that we're going to be traceable and we'll all sign it. So we don't need any. So you see these, all different stages and levels of either mandatory compliance or industry commitments that don't tend to get as much traction if there's not a mandatory component. But at the end of the day, it goes back to what I was mentioning, which is real-time digital transparent supply chains are going to be foundational to leaders and successful operators in food and agriculture. It's just a fact of the matter. And by the way, joke a little bit about, but AI is going to change it too, because if you can harness that data and you can get it into a position where the machine can help accelerate how you use it, then there are real competitive advantages that organizations can gain as they get there. But many of them are on an earlier stage of their journey of just, I got to digitize, or I've got to take this mishmash of solutions and get it into a kind of a unified end-to-end view of my value chain.
Well, and I wonder on this too, with, all the different, AI, everything. And, especially some of these LLMs and stuff. I use a chat bot for my little side hustle Boundary just to help with, customer service. Cause someone's like, where do I find this map? And I'm like, I'm like getting my kids from daycare. Can you chat bot figure it out for me? And it does. It works great. It saves me tons of time. It's like $7 a month. It's like, how do I argue? But I see that component, I think, especially the software side, two parts of it. It's running out, like the paper end of it. There's so much paper. Well, now some of those models, you take a picture of the writing and it'll transpose it like insanely well. Like, I think there's a big thing there of just getting some of that. You can leapfrog because you don't need someone to type it in, which has always been a battle. That gets even onto the reporting side of, from the government side. Like, we need to think that way of transposing. We can leapfrog the digital side if we use some of these newer tools. And then even on the adoption side, I mean, even if you're heavily involved in, say, XYZ service provider, ag retailer, and they're using your software, for instance, is everyone in that operation using it to its full effect? No, you have laggards of users in their own right. You have the power users, And then, which might be honestly 5-10% of the staff that really are using it. I've seen that everywhere. And then, then there's always the guy that just never does it. He has some other person do it for him. Well, maybe that's where some of these other features come into play. If someone that hates using software, which I feel is a good chunk of ag, can just call to the software, I think maybe this is the thing for farmers. If I'm a farmer and say, take my phone, give me a sustainability report on Dad's 80 using whatever data that is there through my service provider. And that's the question they ask, because that's the question they would ask. And then it just kind of does it. And it brings it out. Like, that's how people want to probably use software. Or on the service level provider, it's like, I need to build a subscription, but it needs this workflow. It needs to cover these things. Give me an optimal area. And then just like on ChatGPT, like I'll do with a synopsis of this whole podcast from the transcript, like, oh, put it in a funnier tone. Oh, don't be in the third person, or I'll do things like that, and it'll change and learn. Like, I think that's where software needs to go in ag. And I'm assuming you guys are looking into stuff like that too.
Absolutely. I mean, looking ahead, looking around the corner, again, foundationally, I think you have to have it in the context of some structured data set, which is, I think really where some of the challenge may come in is because back to what's the maturity of that entity? Are they mature enough to where kind of LLM, AI, some type of a new model can be applied? So I think it's it's a bit of the Achilles heel, is you've got to get it somewhat in the context, but undoubtedly with some of the examples you just used, may be a great way for either data entry or over time, as you have more structured data, the ability to interact with it in a more meaningful manner. So the potential is there, and we're certainly ear to the ground and making investments in many of those future initiatives. But I think it also has to be synced up with a point you made earlier, and that is, our adoption capabilities and even our knowledge, it's got to be hyperlinked to value, or there's going to be a return for it, because those tend to be the places you talked about, power users versus people that aren't using. Unless there's specific business impact that you can link utilization of software to, what I've seen is folks they're not going to use it if it's not either required or that they can see tangible business impact from it.
Yeah, and I think, to the other point as well, what I described would be a beautiful scenario. It was that easy. It gets back to our more core conversation is, unless some of the things that were built 30 years ago and then 25 years ago and 20 years ago, and all these underlying pipes and understanding of how to connect everything, you can't actually, these newer AI, LLM methods, stuff like that, AI analytic methods, they can't exist. They can't work. They're just a name. And I think that's one thing that I want more people to understand too, is like, you're building all these different pipes through all these different value chains. For a consumer to be able to ask the question, where did this milk come from, is not a simple question or a simple thing to answer. Because if you don't have all these underlying things and buildups through the entire industry, the core things, this structure of time and patience and hard points and different people and acquisitions and money and people trying new things, like if you don't have all of these storylines, you can't answer the simplest question.
So you're saying that a load of milk that's, continuous flow, that may have been commingled upon pickup and then commingled into a silo at the plant and then fractionated through the plant and into multiple products and out to the store shelf. You're saying that's not easy to track without underlying data.
Well, but that's the consumer expectations sometimes, or that's what we that's what I
It
think.
wasn't grown in the back of the store. I mean,
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's some survey, half of Americans are like, "Where's your food come from?" Well, it comes from a grocery store. It's like, well, yeah, it's inherently you're right. But then they're like, well, where does it actually come from? Oh, it comes from a cow. Oh, okay. I mean, maybe that's the bigger point. We're so bad at educating, normal consumers but we're consumers ourselves, and I don't know. It's like the whole ag tech space, at least that we're in, is like it's talked about in major magazines and everywhere, and it's all this, push and talk. We're like the smallest segment of the industry. It's still tiny, and we're like expected to like build all these amazing, huge things, and there's so much expectation. And like I said earlier, I'm just trying to get it out so people can understand actually how hard and complicated and nuanced all this is, and all the efforts of people like you and other colleagues of mine and myself to some degree that we deal with to put all this shit together. For just a little bit of success,
yeah,
just want something for it.
it just takes 30 years to get there, is what I learned.
Yeah, I'm worried it's going to take me like 50 because I like started really early, and I'll burn out. I'll bring it up because it's just a funny story. I was telling my wife yesterday, or maybe it wasn't. Yeah, I think it was her. It's like, there's plenty of happy people. I'm a happy person in what I do in the ag tech world, and it actually does tie to ag kind of in the grocery store thing. There's a guy, the happiest guy I've ever met in his job was a septic tank guy that would clean out your septic tank, and he worked at a grocer. He managed a grocery store for 30 years, and you think of that sometimes. That's all great. He's got to deal with all this stuff and all the, shelves and all this stuff, all this data that we've been putting together. And the guy is happier by cleaning up what happens after we eat and take through it all. It's funny how the world works sometimes. Maybe a horrible segment. I don't.
Yeah.
But I mean, overall, I guess, I mean, it's good to see like how you guys have evolved. I think just in a storyline that says to others, from the CPG world, consumer world, it's like the stuff's not impossible. It can be done. It's also not overnight, but some of these pieces can get together. I guess, what are you wanting more of the ag world to understand about what you guys do, or others like you? Like, what do you want to tell more, educate more on?
I think I've kind of hit on some of the things that I think are most critical, which is innovation matters, right? Domain expertise matters, patience matters, which ties back to how are you capitalized matters, but very optimistic about kind of the advancements I think we'll be making as an industry over the next decade, and super proud to serve the industry. It's for me, it's a real pleasure having grown up around my father, who just turned 90, still gets up and goes to work every day, and followed him into the food business, and just really proud to be a part of that family legacy, and really an industry that I think we just dedicated, hardworking, high integrity folks, and we have the good fortune of being on the digital side of it, and I think that there's going to be massive demand and massive need, and as I mentioned earlier, commend the innovators and those bringing new solutions to market, and hopefully some of the things we've discussed today would be words of wisdom around how do you capitalize, how do you find product market fit, and how do you get to a sustainable, commercially viable operation quickly. We'll continue to interact with a lot of those. Many of those have, as you mentioned, Agency Root, a great young success story that brought a fantastic platform to market. They did it the right way, and became part of the family within the last year. And So we love to see those stories and those innovators, and we innovate internally, but we also know that there's some really exciting things being incubated, and anticipate that increasingly we'll have. I think the unfortunate environment that many have been in, that have maybe 6 to 7 year old startups that have run into some funding issues, that deal flow is much greater. As I know you probably see it out there. I'm sure some of the larger ag tech players see what's going on in the space. But to me, it's not it's just a natural cycle, as we've discussed. And it's, I think, the need for innovation, the need for advancement, the need for continuing to drive the industry forward. We're certainly committed to it at EverAg, and very optimistic about the future.
Well, I think those are good words to end on, and we're getting to our time anyways, but it's been a pleasure talking with you, Scott, on all this, and I'm sure we'll have to talk more on it, as there's just so much there's so much more we could break down. Of course, I think the level of the time you've been in it, and the patience, that's a big thing that people just need to focus on, and not overdo it, because that's been problematic. But you got to push the boundaries too. So I don't know, there's really no real answer. You got to take some risks. You took risks early, everyone has, and it plays out in certain ways. But I think the more and more people see people like yourselves and others that kind of get to that next level, it kind of it helps others that come into the space kind of see, oh, okay, well, that's possible. At least we can get there to some degree. Maybe, I don't know how, but I'll get there. So,
well, I hope it's been a bit of a, at least the story. I don't know if I would call it, it's certainly not fast success, but to your point, it's important work, and hope it's helpful to your community of listeners and podcast viewers, and happy to continue to keep the dialogue going in a future session, and appreciate the invite and the opportunity to talk to you and your audience.
Well, I appreciate that, and thanks again, Scott, for being here. And to all the listeners and watchers, my dog's also barking at me in the background, so I guess he knows it's time to go. But thanks for listening, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, like, share, all those fun things. And thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.